Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our Target Gender Equality Live audience, and welcome to Target Gender Equality, Target Ethnic Diversity. This is a special panel discussion organized by the UN Global Compact Network UK to discuss the importance of and the rationale for ethnic diversity and an intersectional approach to women's leadership and representation in business. My name is Carla Drpic. I am a project manager at the UN Global Compact Network UK, and I will be your moderator for this session. And joining me today are four brilliant guest speakers: Seema Baines from DWF, Pavita Cooper from the 30% Club, Daniel Danso, and Sonia Sisse from Linklaters. And this great speaker lineup will present a few good practice case studies of championing gender and ethnic diversity at the highest levels of different businesses and organizations. But just to give you all a little more background on us as a local network before I introduce our speakers, the UK network was one of the 19 local networks worldwide participating in Target Gender Equality in 2020. And we are now recruiting for a new cohort of companies for the program in 2021. So if you're a UK network member, you can head over to our website or the UN Global Compact website and apply to be part of the new edition of the program. And now let me introduce our speakers. And as a reminder, you can read their bios in the agenda of the event. And I would recommend that you do that because they're quite interesting. Our first speaker is Seema Baines, partner at DWF, a Target Gender Equality participating company. Seema is also a partner director on DWF's board and head of DWF's Diversity and Inclusion Leadership Group. Seema has been instrumental in creating an inclusive culture at DWF, growing the leadership group into a global board and designing trailblazing gender and ethnicity targets across all levels of the business. Following on from Seema, also joining us today is Pavita Cooper. Pavita is the founder of More Difference. She's also a steering committee member of the 30% Club and commissioner to the board of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Pavita has over 30 years of experience as an executive talent leader across a range of multi-sector global organizations, and she's a passionate advocate of gender diversity across the C-suite and committed to accelerating the progression of women, ethnic minorities, and leaders from less traditional backgrounds. Next up, we have Daniel Danso, Global Diversity Manager at Linklaters, also a UK network member company. Since joining Linklaters, Daniel has led the firm through the global expansion of its D&I strategy and action plan. And Daniel also designs and delivers D&I training both internally and externally around the globe. And he also advises the firm and its clients on key business issues, including culture change, D&I, ESG, and others. And last but not least, we have Sonia Sisse, a counsel and head of the technology, media, and telecommunications privacy team at Linklaters in Paris. Sonia's practice covers the full range of TMT legal areas with a focus on data protection, contracts, e-commerce, and telecommunications. So thank you all once again for joining us. And now, without further ado, let's give you the chance to share some of your thoughts on the topic at hand. So the first question I wanted to ask you all is about considering diversity in business beyond just gender. So while it's great to see so much enthusiasm for Target Gender Equality and other global corporate gender equality programs, something that does tend to get overlooked at times is that ideally women's representation in business should include women from different ethnic backgrounds, classes and socioeconomic backgrounds too, and with differing abilities and identities. So what would you say to those businesses who may think that focusing on all of these different aspects of diversity at once is too much of a challenge? Seema, if you don't mind, we can start with you.
Absolutely, thank you. And I think it's a great question. I think in order for businesses to create full inclusion or equality for women, we've got to focus on all aspects of women's identities and acknowledge the biases that all women experience. So unless you're going to truly get to the barriers of gender progression and creating gender equality, you've got to take into account all aspects of diversity. And I can appreciate that it can be overwhelming for businesses when you have got different priorities, but giving that intersectional lens enables you to see how various forms of inequality operate together and which exacerbate each other. So some of the things that we've done are perhaps partnering with emerging talent networks that have an intersectional lens, such as Women in the City or the Afro-Caribbean Network, but also working with developing programs that target social mobility and ethnic minority underrepresentation. So, for example, in the legal sector, the Ethnic Minority Access Scheme with Aspiring Solicitors has been a really great program to enable us to look at things from an intersectional perspective.
Great, thank you very much. Pavita, over to you.
I think what I would add is that when any organisation goes on the journey of trying to address any element of diversity, it's not a zero-sum game. So by focusing on one group, that doesn't mean that somehow you discount the impact that you're trying to have with other groups. And you do tend to see a halo effect when an organisation starts focusing on the notion of inclusion. The world should improve for everyone. I think it's not possible to group all women together. In the 30% Club, we started talking about all women in the terminology we're using around language for gender progression, because the reality is lived experience for each of those individual groups of women is different. And if you are in a homogenous group, which is predominantly white, middle class, you've had a similar experience, education, access to opportunity, whether you're a man or a woman, you're part of a very similar group. And for example, if you're a young Black woman, it's going to be very different. Your lived experience and the access of perhaps reduced opportunities you have will have been different, or perhaps less. And so I don't think it's possible just to group everyone together. It is really important that organisations understand those individual experiences for all women, because actually they can be quite stark, the differences. So it is important. And I think organisations understand that this is a very sophisticated, complex issue. And I'm certainly seeing evidence that they are doing more to try and really get underneath, looking at the data in a much more analytical way and understanding all those key transition points and the various intersections and overlaps that exist.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Pavita. Daniel, you're no stranger to intersectionality, so over to you.
For me, I think the rationale behind thinking about this is that whether we're working on it or not, all of these elements that are affecting different groups of people are happening in the world around us. So whether we're personally as a business focusing on gender inequality is happening. So I think, the reality of businesses trying to deal with multiple things, that is unfortunately how complex the problem is. So I think the tendency to want to find silver bullet solutions to things without fully understanding, the landscape, it's something that we have to deal with. But I don't necessarily see the rushing towards, trying to find a individual solution as a negative. I think that shows a willingness to want to do something. So I think we should capitalize on that. And just on intersectionality, for me, one of the things that really elevated our thinking was taking something like, a women's leadership program that every company has, world leading, they're amazing. But looking at that through the lens of the area that we cover, you suddenly see that women in certain local geographies experience being a woman very differently than they do in the US and the UK. So suddenly a women's leadership program, it's not going to take care of a lot of the problems that we think it might. So having an intersectional view is really important. It's pivotal to make something like that applicable for more than just what a woman may deal with in the context of work. There are many different things outside of that she'll have to deal with. And we need to know about those if we want to sustain our workforce.
Great, thank you very much. Sonia, over to you.
Yes. I don't think that I can add much to what has already been said. I think I fully agree with everything that was said just right now. Maybe the thing that I would add would be just that it should not be seen as a challenge. I think that businesses should also look into the situation by just focusing on hiring the best talent. And in order to have the best talent from everywhere, you need to be at least recognize that they come from very different types and very different gender, different colors. And so if you focus on intersectionality, and you will be able to retain as many talents as possible. And that's how I think he should be handled and viewed by businesses, and not just as a challenge.
Great, thank you all so much. And I have a related question this time around. So one of the frequent criticisms that is leveled at different businesses is that although they may have gender-specific or ethnicity-specific initiatives and projects, they do not consider how those initiatives may overlap and reinforce each other. So, for example, how gender pay gap reporting in the UK, for instance, may help with ethnicity pay gap reporting, which is not yet mandatory, but a lot of companies are starting to do it. So what would you recommend to businesses so that they can start thinking about diversity in a more holistic way and connecting all of these different moving parts of a business together? Maybe we can start with Sonia this time around.
Yes, I think that the thing is that, and it's something that Daniel mentioned when we had the conversation before, it's that you're working on a culture. So the more equal your culture is, the better it will be, and it will benefit everyone. So gender pay, if you focus on gender pay gap, then you will also focus on minority pay gap, because you're just working on improving your business culture, and so it would benefit everyone.
Great. Daniel, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think in my experience and what we're trying to do in our approach is to not reinvent the wheel unless we absolutely have to. And in some cases we do, but we have learned quite a bit in our journey with creating equity in gender and looking at everything from what we do culturally to what we do institutionally, systemically, that would lead to us optically looking different. So, we had a year-long conversation about the difference between targets and quotas, but we had it in respects of gender. Why can't we apply that same learning to race or to ethnicity or to LGBT? I think what we've been trying to do, and if you think about really what D&I is trying to do, it's trying to just give you a lens for how different groups of people may experience something, but it's also talking about the commonality of exclusion, what that does to you personally, what that does to you culturally, and what that can do for you institutionally. And so I think the things that we've learned in our journey for gender, we can appropriate those same practices to ethnicity, but we've got to understand why ethnicity in and of itself is different. And that's where I think the combination of cultural learning as well as institutional policy driven accountable practices they have to go hand in hand. But definitely there's a commonality in these movements. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, LGBT rights. It was a commonality of protest and exclusion. And I think while the subjects are different, some of the solutions might be very similar. And I think we should focus on that instead of how different and how scary it might be.
Thank you, Daniel. And Pavita, you must have lots of experience on this issue, so happy to hear your comments about this. Pavita, you're muted.
I think everyone else has very articulately summarised the key issues. I mean, my sense is that for many, many years, I think what all organisations suffered from was an ability to sort of almost homogenise the responses to questions they were asking and aggregate them up to a level which didn't really reveal what was really going on. So if you have 100,000 people and you ask a question, what's the quality of the conversation you're having with your manager about your performance, or how do you feel about the way people are talking to you about how you're getting on and your potential? If you take the majority view and you just average that out, of course you're going to get a positive perspective. So I think what really scrutinising this diversity data forces organisations to do is to really understand that question from the perspective of, the young Asian woman, or the really experienced senior Black leader, or the LGBTQI colleague who sort of says, well, actually, no, my boss doesn't really have a proper conversation with me because I think he feels quite uncomfortable about talking to me. Then you get into the fact that all these people who you value greatly, adding huge value to your organization, are experiencing the world of work in a very different way. And for some of them, it's very excluding. And so what is the compound effect of that? They will leave, they will switch off, they will be disengaged, they will not be positive promoters of your organization and its culture. And so I think we had processes and systems in place that didn't lend themselves to leaders asking the truth. And we weren't very good at asking those questions. So I think it's a positive thing that we're pushing and saying, how do we understand what each of these various questions gives us if we ask the question in a different way? And I think Daniel makes a very, very sensible point. It's about being pragmatic. If we've done it once and we just repeat it, we know it has the same impact for probably all other groups.
Great, thank you very much. And Seema, over to you.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what's been said already. I think for us, one of the biggest things was having roundtable sessions with our senior female leaders and our junior female up-and-coming talent around what were the barriers to progression, but also having listening sessions to just enable people to share that lived experience. We've also done a number of things around blogs and making sure that people understand what that lived experience looks like. So I think just listening to your people and understanding how perhaps gender and race overlap is so important. And I think Kavita made a good point about data as well. Unless you know what you look like as an organisation, you don't know what you need to change. So that data set is absolutely key. And in terms of the pay gap, I completely agree. We published our ethnicity pay gap for the first time last year alongside our gender pay gap. And it really has helped us understand the similarities and different challenges that we have as a business. So again, I would encourage that publication of that pay gap report and the data alongside that, so that you really know what your challenges are and how you can go about fixing them.
Great, thank you very much, Seema. And Daniel, you mentioned that you've applied some of the learnings from your diversity projects and initiatives to movements like the Black Lives Matter last year and perhaps even going forward. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly because the Black Lives Matter protests last year have led many businesses to pledge to become anti-racist, make their workplaces more welcoming to their Black colleagues. But obviously, this is not something that can be done in a day, eliminating systemic racism and discrimination, not just from the workplace, but from other aspects of life. So considering this, what should businesses do to avoid tokenizing their Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, especially women? And what should they do to avoid creating short-term instead of long-term solutions?
Wow. I think on the first part about tokenizing, one thing that happened after June, after George Floyd was murdered, and many businesses kind of took to the airwaves to say how supportive they all were of the Black community in the United States. But something happened because we happened to be sitting in a pandemic. We were all at home connected to the internet and to TikToks and videos in ways that we maybe wouldn't have been had we been commuting and traveling and full on at work. So 2020's Black Lives Matter captured the world in a way that 2015's didn't. And this reverberated around the world. And so what that proved was that the experiences in particular of African Americans was just theirs. So Black British people were saying, well, we're not getting killed by police, we're getting stopped at search 8 times compared to our white, compatriots. But then Black people in Belgium were saying, well, those two things aren't happening, I can't get an apartment. So what it showed was there was a commonality of exclusion for Blackness that may not have existed for other ethnic groups. And when businesses saw that kind of counterpointed in the lack of this particular group making it, targets and things ensued. What ended up happening was a lot of businesses needed to suddenly open up airwaves to have very personal conversations amongst their workforces with Black members of staff and, allies who were trying to grapple with being afraid of entering into it or not. And so the one bit of advice that we employed for ourselves, because we created race talks, so we gave them parameters for having accurate conversations, because we can't in the same respects try to address historic social racism versus things that are going on in my day-to-day at Linklaters. And I think we were trying to have those two conversations at the same time, and they weren't helpful. So we gave parameters around that. So that's the first thing that businesses can do. Grab your people, give them some parameters around what is a really great conversation and what isn't. The second thing was we told them to stop asking every Black person in the firm to reconfirm how horrible their experiences were, because, you know, while it did make it personal, it's not my responsibility. And it actually, to make me relive that, it's not about my benefit, it's about yours. And I think we needed to kind of address that. So we asked them to, you know, to make sure that they shared what they were feeling as allies. They were just as appalled, and they have every right to say that. But we also had to grab, you know, people from minority backgrounds to say, you know, for the first time, what we have been talking about is going to be talked about at work, and we've got to let them make mistakes. They're going to get it wrong. They're going to check in with you all of a sudden, out of the blue. You know, all of that stuff's going to happen, and you know it's because you're Black. So you've got to let it actually be productive. And so there is a lot of work that has to go on in the culture. You cannot just throw a policy at this or a program. You have got to actually get people in the culture. The policies and programs will be amazing, but they will only work if people understand how they fit into it.
So it was a big learning curve, I think, for many companies last year. Yeah.
Absolutely. And still is.
Yeah, definitely. Sonia, what about your take on this? I imagine that from the perspective of working in Paris, things are going to be a little different than what we know about the UK or the US. You muted.
It's exactly what Daniel described, is that we don't get shot in Paris. We get stopped by the police more often than others, of course, but and we don't get apartments. But I think it's very specific to your cultural environment. Maybe I don't know if there is a way not to tokenize your minorities at work. I have absolutely no great solution. I think that Daniel explained how the best way to do it. But what is important in what he's just said, I think, is just that you should not focus on the short-term solution. You should not just use that the Black Lives Matters or use let's say the trend around diversity, minority, and inclusion just to fix a temporary solution and say, look, I've hired 2 new Black women. I'm really happy. I did my good deal for 2020 and 2021. So now I can rest. The thing is, you should focus on looking around and maybe just ask yourself whether your task force, your employees look like people outside, the people you can see outside. And it should be like looking at the long game, you know, not just fixing a situation right now, just like I wanted to have a very diverse environment, very flexible, accessible to everyone. And so it's not something that's going to be changed in a month or in a year. And you should recognize that, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose one of the key bits about doing that is not letting this be a moment, because it is a movement after all, and it needs long-term change. Thank you. Pavita, happy to hear your insights on this.
I like to sort of assume positive intent in other people. And I think most leaders, when this happened, genuinely wanted to speak and say something. I think the problem is, in many instances, that there was a sense that it was tone deaf in the way that it landed. And as a result, an unintended consequence of many organisation responses was a sense that it was tokenism. And I think some social media campaigns like the Blackout didn't help. on Instagram, because I think it led people to feel a sense of, I need to jump on this and be seen to do something. And I think I counted the word redouble our efforts in 17 responses by organizations on LinkedIn. And I think that's really interesting, because I've known those businesses for a long time, and over the last 10 years, I haven't done much on race. So how do you redouble nothing? So actually, I think what they really wanted to say is, we have really dropped the ball on this. We haven't really been focused on it. We need to start now, not redouble. So I think there was something about language and words and intention. And if you, again, assume the best in everyone and know that everyone was starting to try to do something positive, that's important. What I feel really saddened by is that in the last few months, many people in different organisations have said to me they felt that the initial burst has somewhat dissipated, and it's like the wave came in and now it's being pulled back by the tide, and therefore the flurry of activity that happened in the summer has either gone quiet or has been left completely down to employee resource groups. And they are not necessarily the people who are responsible for carrying the heavy lifting of this burden because of the emotional impact. And I think the thing I was struck by is, of course, it had a profound effect on many people, you know, particularly our Black colleagues. But in the groups I ran, there were Indian, Chinese, Middle Eastern people in those groups. They were all as equally triggered by the events. But of course, what happened is people had made an assumption about the group to whom this affected most. And there was other people saying, I'm struggling just as much. So we go back to your original question of, you know, can you just group people together? No, you can't, because everyone's had a different experience. So my hope is that, you know, where there are some really positive efforts and initiatives that have been put in place, that they don't just fall by the side. People continue to pay attention, they continue to understand. And for the first time ever in my working life, I think I've been confronted with leaders who've had to look at themselves and say, this is not just about what I do at work, but in my personal circle, who do my kids play with? When we go to the park on a Saturday afternoon, the kids are having a run around of football, whatever. Who are they? You know, who are they connecting with? Who are we worshipping in our church with? Who's at our dinner parties? And that's a question they have to ask themselves, because if that is yet another homogenous group of people that don't look like them, how are they going to understand the impact of what's happening in the world of work with a very diverse workforce? And I think for the first time, I saw leaders actually have to ask themselves that question and really think about how they live the structure of their own lives outside of the workplace.
Those are some really good points. And I think, yeah, one of the most impactful things, for me at least, about the Black Lives Matter movement last year was that it prompted not just reassessing what's going on in the professional lives of many people, but also personal lives. So that was really good to see. And hopefully, you know, we can see some of that change going forward, because there hasn't been much personal introspection, I think, in relation to, you know, when we're talking about gender diversity at work, you normally only talk about targets for women's representation at board levels or, you know, in senior management, but there isn't as much personal reflection. So that was one of the good things that came out of all these discussions last year, I think.
And if I can add something without jumping in too harshly, I think that the thing for me, both doing this as a job and being this as a person, it's very difficult when the ideology is that you are the thing that is broken, that needs to be addressed in order to play equally, when the recognition that the system is failing to recognize you for a whole host of reasons, for the acumen that you possess. And when, you know, as a minority of a variety of ilk, whether it's gender or race, you have to be better in order to be normal. You know, those of us that are good enough will never be seen, because that system won't be the thing. And that's why I'm saying there's a cultural bit that has to be done as well, to get people to even recognize that the next time a Black person is promoted after this race, you know, Black Lives Matter movement, you know, there's always going to be a question. Was it because they were Black? Of course they were. You know, we have these targets now. We're going to promote people that we've never promoted before. And that's the thing that we had to deal with gender. Getting people to understand that the next time a woman is promoted or put on a piece of work or put on a deal with a client is not because she's a woman. It's because we're recognizing that she should have always been there. And to me, you know, the challenge is I've got to say to men in the respects, you know, of gender, that some of these guys work incredibly hard. They don't see their family, their kids. And I have to say that if we were actually playing with a full talent pool, some of you still wouldn't be here. And that doesn't make a comment at all about how hard you work or your acumen. It's just saying that there was a period of time where we were not balanced and we did not have everybody that should have been. And that is not their fault. So it's a shift between looking at that group and thinking that we're lowering standards and quality. No, we're fixing a system that never recognized them. And that has to be a shift.
Yeah, it's about leveling the playing field, isn't it? Great. Seema, any last remarks on this question?
I echo everything that's been said. Again, I think that the Black Lives Matter movement really did see a sea change in approach that I don't think we've really seen before. And I think it's recognising that it isn't just an issue for the marginalised group. It's actually a business issue. It's about your talent. It's about your clients. It's about your people. And it's recognising that it is that overall approach. And I think to just place the burden on one group is absolutely the wrong thing to do. It's a systemic change that we need to make overall. And I think the point about allyship is absolutely key. And I think the only thing I would add to that is in relation to understanding, you know, at board level, the challenges that people face. So, you know, we've done a lot around our executive board sponsors meeting with our race and ethnicity networks, and our exec board sponsors aren't from marginalised groups, and effectively having those one-to-one conversations and challenging the business and the strategies that we've got to really raise those issues at senior level. And I think it's about having that systemic change. It isn't about changing one thing. It's what we touched on earlier. It's that overall holistic approach to change the overall culture, to ensure, exactly as you said, that we are levelling the playing field, that we're creating equal opportunities for all. And it's not about positive discrimination, but it is about positive action. It is about making sure that everyone has equal opportunities.
Great, thank you very much, Seema. And now, if we can shift the conversation a little bit, I want to talk a little more about your organizations specifically and the work that you have been doing personally on some of these things. So, Pavita, we can probably start with the 30% Club. So, in 2020, the UK chapter of the 30% Club announced for the first time a set of ethnicity targets in addition to gender targets for boards and C-suites. So how has the uptake of these targets among 30% Club members been? Has it been encouraging at all?
So I think, to be fair, you know, we had a zeitgeist moment last year where lots of people were already on this debate and starting to think about representation. And there were other driving forces. So, for example, the Parker Review and the fact that there was going to be a degree of pressure for FTSE boards to try and broaden representation. And unfortunately, 40% of FTSE 100 boards still don't have anyone of colour on their board. So despite these things being in place, progress is slow. So the CBI did some great work sort of going out there saying, come on, let's push, let's do more. There's lots of positive talk. There's lots of yes, we must do it, and lots of very earnest nodding of the head. And I don't think, again, you'd find a CEO or a chair anywhere that would argue that this is not something that's worth doing. But for all the reasons that I think Daniel set out, it's hard. Because what you have is a massive disconnect between what I see, which is a wonderful, diverse pool of very able and very capable talent, and then a system in between the opportunities that's blocking. And what's really interesting is when people self-organise, so I'm a part of a group of BAME women that have come together to try and help each other to get their first listed roles on boards, and we are having more success than those individuals are having when they use the traditional routes, i.e. going to an executive search firm or trying to reach out to a chair directly. And I think, why is that? Why is it that when we mobilise and we find opportunities and we push people forward and we help people understand the system and the way things work and who you need to have conversations with and where the decision making happens and who's got the power, you can make change. But when you just allow the system to work, it doesn't. And I think therein lies the issue. So our organisation's embracing the idea of a wider a broader target beyond gender? Yes. Are we making really great progress and moving fast? No. You know, if we talk about the hundreds of years it's going to take to get women to parity, then I don't even want to begin to think about how long it's going to take for us to get anywhere in parity on the issue of race. So we're a long, long way away.
Yeah, I think the latest statistic on achieving gender equality in business is about 250 years. So probably even worse when it comes to ethnic diversity. Yeah, going back to DWF and Seema, your work on gender and ethnic diversity targets, you have been crucial in designing these and in pioneering some of the D&I best practice across the business. So can you talk a little bit more about some of these best practices and your plans for achieving these targets?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually published our gender and ethnicity targets back in 2019. And as part of that, what we actually wanted to do was, as I touched on earlier, recognise what we look like internally as a business. So we have done a huge amount of work in relation to our ethnicity disclosure and making sure that people are completing their data so that we know what we look like as an organisation. Having the board approve those targets, we then set about working with each division to create their own action plans for how they were going to address their target within their particular division. And so each division has now come up with their action plan. And then what we do is we look at that on a quarterly basis. So we collate the data on a quarterly basis and go to the division and talk to them about what changes they've seen in their data over that previous quarter and what amendments they may need to make to their action plan if the data is going in the wrong direction. And there may be an explanation for it, there may not be, but we've got to keep tracking that data through every quarter. And as part of that, we also report into our executive board so they know what the data looks like on a quarterly basis. We've also deployed blind CVs for all senior mid-career level roles, and we've rolled out inclusive hiring training for all our hiring managers. We're rolling out inclusive leadership training for all our senior leaders. We also ensured that mandatory D&I training was rolled out across the business. And in specific response to the Black Lives Matter movement, we actually came up with a 5-point action plan last year around tracking talent and making sure that we're progressing and retaining ethnic minority talent. And so the five points we really touched on was tracking our emerging talent, and that, you know, that's our paralegals, our apprentices, our trainees. And actually, when we started tracking that, we realised that 35% of our recruitment at the emerging talent level is from ethnic minorities. So it's great to see that we're already making some progress in that area, and 75% are women. We also wanted some transparency around how we fill senior leadership roles, so making sure that everyone knows what criteria are necessary for those senior leadership roles and how you can fill them. We made sure that all of our partners and directors have a diversity and inclusion objective as part of their overall objectives, which is linked to pay and reward. And we also looked at actually our client teams and how our clients are serviced and what the client teams look like, and making sure that we have diverse client teams, which is really important from a talent pipeline and succession planning pipeline too. And finally, we wanted to make sure that when we're looking at the business overall and what we're doing, we're looking at it through a D&I lens. So every business decision we take, we look at it with a D&I lens, whether that's hiring, promotion, attrition. And that's not to say you don't take that decision if it has an adverse effect, but I think you've got to understand the impact of what those decisions are being made and how that's impacting on your data and what you look like as an organisation. So we've done an awful lot of work in that area, and actually it's great to be recognised by the Financial Times for our innovative approach to advancing race and ethnicity in the workplace last year. But I think, as we've already touched on, there's a long way to go. We recognise that we're on a journey. So, even with the targets that we've got, it's a milestone, not a destination, and we recognise that is a journey.
Definitely, but I think things will be made easier with comprehensive plans like yours. Thank you, Seema.
No problem.
And over to Daniel and Sonia. So, Daniel, a question for you. So, after doing some research on Linklaters and what you have been doing in terms of ethnic minority targets and specifically the targets for your trainees, found out that Linklaters aims to have 35% ethnic minority trainees in the UK, including 10% Black trainees each year. And this specific target for Black trainees is, I think, a really interesting one, although it's still quite uncommon to see it among businesses at large. So can you speak a little bit about the rationale behind this target, and would you recommend that other businesses do something similar, so disaggregating these ethnic diversity targets?
Yeah, I think the rationale for us really started a couple of years ago, because I think, like a lot of different businesses, looking at recruitment and the relationship with emerging talent, wherever that's coming from, has always been at the forefront of our mind. But I think over the last couple of years, thinking about how the generations are changing, again, the onset of technology, the fact that nobody's brand is their own anymore. We have no control anymore over what anybody says about us. We're on social media. So, I mean, I think that there was a lot of internal thinking around the fact that everyone's an ambassador at some point. So it's no longer okay just to want to be best in class. If anybody doesn't have that experience, they've got anybody on the planet they can tell, so we have to actually, really think about how we're entering into these things. So going into our race action plan, it was really important that we understood and addressed something that wasn't really allowed to us, which is the categorizations of things, because BAME is something that we have to use. It's not necessarily how people identify themselves. So we had to make a decision as far as what we understood and what we wanted diversity to be and inclusion to be, and that's why we were able to separate it. Different businesses may think differently. Depending on your size, it may get down to numbers that are so small that it becomes uncomfortable and identifiable. But I think every business has got to work out for themselves how they want to think about it. And so for us, that's where we ended up. I think the importance of that was this. BAME is a catch-all category that doesn't actually talk about, even the differences and advantages of the minority ethnic groups that are in that. And when you have Asian, which could mean something in the United States, something different in the UK, and then something very, very different in Asia, how are we even thinking about the right categories? So we just decided to split them out and call them what they are. The way that we went forward with looking at our targets, we're lucky because, as a law firm, we not only have the population to draw upon or to compare to, but we also have the industry. There's only a couple of different ways to come into a law firm as a lawyer. One's a graduate, the other's experienced. So, we could tell, what percentage of people from various backgrounds were coming through law. So our stats and our aspirational targets are a combination of those things. But I think other businesses, they may have to look at different areas of where their populations are coming from. Where do they grab talent? I think the other thing with that is that our targets, like anything, they are aspirational and sometimes they will not be hit. But the point of them are to give ourselves a line in the sand so that we know when we do hit it, amazing, we can work on that and push them higher. When we don't, what has happened along that entire pipeline, along that system that made that not the case? And I think that is the thing that is measurable. That's the thing that is realistic, and that's what's progressive. So I'm all for targets as long as you understand the difference between targets and quotas. And as long as you make sure that your people understand that if they are the subject of a target, that it is about rectifying a system that doesn't recognize them rather than fixing them. And, as Seema said, making sure that you bring the voices of those individuals that are not represented in the seats of power where decisions are being made about them up there. Whether it's reverse mentoring, like I'm sure a lot of us have, whether it is doing any of those things that bring those voices together to senior people, you've got to bring those things along with just doing the stats.
Great, thank you. Very, very insightful. And just to touch on the race action plan that you mentioned, Daniel, happy for either you or Sonia to take this. So this plan specifically focuses on improving the representation of Black and underrepresented minority ethnic lawyers and business team members at all levels. So could you tell us whether or how this plan interacts with your gender equality initiatives? So are you confident that that your company will be able to promote more Black, Asian and ethnic minority women to senior leadership positions in the future?
I'll take the first half of that. And Sonia, do you want to take the second half?
Okay.
And I'll be brief. So I think the first half, how does it intersect? I think you're going to naturally, if you understand intersectionality, you know, a lot of the things that you do will naturally hit different intersectional groups. So that's going to happen by proxy. The trick is, and this is the most critical thing, is to actually call out the intersectionality. And so when we do things like we get our gender equality network and the He for She network together with our Black, Asian, and minority ethnic network, we do things like featuring you know, prominent Black women who have made a contribution to business as part of International Women's Day. So it's being smart and clever about opportunities to do that culturally. But I think when you're thinking about programs, like our women's leadership program, like I said, we will naturally grab women from a variety of intersectional backgrounds. But the strength in that is being able to call out and to pair up again, the intersection with the networks, intersection with the staff. So really, really pulling women from minority ethnic backgrounds into those programs. And so I think you're going to hit it naturally. The strength is calling it out. The same thing that we do with LGBT and BAME. During LGBT History Month, we talk about prominent Black, you know, figures in the LGBT rights movement, so that we're actually showing that these two things are not mutually exclusive. You know, we do not live in a strand of diversity. We live in all of them. So the more intersections we can help them see, the better.
Okay, and I'll elaborate on whether we're confident or not that because of all those initiatives, we are going to attract, retain, and promote, you know, people from diverse ethnic backgrounds. Well, we don't know. You're asking us whether we're 100% sure that in 10 years we will have like Black partners, Asian partners, any other type of partners. And I don't know. I don't think that anybody here can tell that who he would be promoted where. But I think that what is important is that we're trying all the initiatives that Daniel described, like the Women Leadership Program or the Women Day, the LGBT initiatives. Everything that we have across the firm is at least trying to do something to get there. And I will maybe let you know a little bit about me. I was lucky enough to attend the Women Leadership Program like 2 years ago. And it helped me tremendously. I was, at the end of my program, I was promoted to counsel. And 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a junior lawyer. She's a Black woman. And she told me, like, when you get promoted to counsel, I felt like the firm recognized us, and I decided to stay. I had another opportunity and decided to stay. So I'm pretty sure that's the way it's going to work, because I stayed because of that program, and she stayed because I was promoted. So it might work, it might not, but at least we're trying. And, you know, like individually, it changes. I mean, it makes a difference, at least at the individual level. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good to hear that she took you as a role model in a way. That's a really good example. Thank you very much. And yeah, I think at this point, all that remains is for me to thank all four of you for participating, and also to thank our audience for listening in. And it's been really great to have this conversation with all of you, and I hope that everyone in the audience will take away some of your points to their own organizations and hopefully make them better. So thank you very much, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.